I think for people like us, children of migrant workers born in the late 80s, trying to find a woman to marry now is practically impossible. I've already chosen to lie down and give up because there's no other way. We don't have much money, we don't have a good house. We don't have a career. We're older now, and love practically doesn't happen for people like us. Our life is basically like this. The younger girls certainly don't consider us. And if it's to marry someone divorced, or with children from a second marriage, I can't accept that either. Moreover, even those women, often divorced, have high expectations, demanding dowries of hundreds of thousands of yuan. Honestly, I don't see the point. Spending that much money to end up washing dishes for someone else? And even if married, her heart probably won't be with our family. So it would just be suffering, with no meaning. I think it's better to give up on everything. In the end, life is just a few decades. It's better to live it more lightly and comfortably. Also, looking at our relatives, classmates, and friends our age. Their children are already in high school or even working and earning money, while we have nothing. Talking about our social circles from those years, I feel numb. We've already given up on it because we no longer have anything in common. And when we meet, the conversations are very awkward. It's better to cut off these relationships completely and live alone, in peace and silence. In the end, it doesn't make a difference.
难道就因为穷，现在的农村青年连配偶权都要丧失了吗？是的。
Does being poor mean that today's rural youth are even losing the right to choose a spouse? Yes, when I returned to my hometown for the Chinese New Year, I discovered that the single men in the village, due to their shameful status as bachelors, had lost the former vigor and passion they once had. Instead, they now emitted a sense of languor that was out of place for their age. Depressed, disheartened, drinking, playing cards, and staying out of social activities like visiting relatives or friends. They were all staying at home, unwilling to step outside, showing their wounds, and spending the entire new year with their parents. This state of being down and out is not only the result of economic pressure, but more importantly, the mental torment caused by prejudice and discrimination. One can change their financial situation through hard work or place their hopes in the next generation. But if they don't even have a wife, it's as if they are destined to be eliminated by natural selection, with the family bloodline coming to an end. The bright lights of other people's homes, children by their side, can easily make you feel ashamed and sigh in regret. Indeed, loneliness is shameful. So, while we are concerned with issues like the fog in you, global warming, rising prices, and whether fireworks will be allowed during the Chinese New Year, these men are facing the most basic and primal need for reproduction and survival. It is often said that one should marry first when meeting a good person, or establish a career first when meeting a noble person. Don't worry about the road ahead without friends, and with wealth, there will naturally be lies. But how important it is to establish a family before a career, everyone knows in their heart. This is a picture of Li Dan from my wedding in 2005, which I've kept until today. A dowry of 2,000 yuan, and my mother-in-law even gave half of it back. After losing money from a business, I was penniless. With the help of my 3 older sisters, I bought furniture and hosted the wedding banquet with 9,000 yuan. With the blessings of my fellow villagers, I brought a beautiful girl home as my wife. It was only with the support of my wife that I learned to be more optimistic. If my circumstances at that time were applied to today, let's not even talk about an interesting soul or a good appearance. Even if I were divorced with children, I wouldn't be able to aspire to such a life. Any woman would do. Perhaps that was the only requirement I had when I dared to choose a spouse. At the age of 30, still alone, the ambition and lofty ideals I once had were long shattered by the harsh reality. With no money in the bank, no house in the city, no wife at home, and no light in my eyes, the days of having enough food for myself but no appetite to pursue anything else left me feeling like the most comfortable life was to give up. We cannot view such a serious social issue as a joke from a godlike perspective. The difficulty of marriage among rural youth is not just about personal abilities. Factors like sky-high bride prices, societal trends, education, healthcare, welfare, pensions, and the lack of rural development improvements all contribute to the true causes of this issue. If this situation continues, a few years from now, you might have to pay to see rural youth. Remember, we are an agricultural country, not an agricultural superpower. In other words, We have not yet reached the era where machines completely replace human labor, and we are still reliant on farmers to ensure food security. There's a saying online that if farming could make money, farmers would have no land to farm. If food prices rise dramatically, all farmers will be unemployed. This sounds somewhat reasonable but is actually ridiculous. I'll ask you, when house prices rise so high, have you ever seen a developer move a single brick? When gold goes up to over 600 yuan per gram, have you ever seen a boss named Ju work in a mine? This is the class system, using time cost to exchange for labor compensation. No matter how food prices rise, the ones planting crops will always be farmers. If this group of people starts disappearing, do you really expect city white-collar workers to go farm the land? The imbalance between men and women and the social trends make the rural youth's marriage market even more challenging. The sweat in the gym smells of hormones, but the sweat in the fields is full of sourness. We can't blame women today for being superficial and materialistic. Even elderly women would rather squeeze into the steel and concrete cities, using their bodies to bump into trees for exercise, swinging on bars like children, than run wild in the vast, green countryside. Is it because of the high cost of living in the city or the clean air? Isn't it because the elderly in cities have social security and hospitals to rely on? Young people would rather have dinner at home than wander and depend on others. It's also because the city has good schools and teachers. If rural people were provided with good education and security in their old age, they would be able to farm with peace of mind and achieve success. If the ultimate goal for rural people is just to move to the city, then rural fruit trees will remain unable to grow and city residents won't be able to afford them. It's like rich people who earn money at home but spend it abroad. They will soon deplete their wealth. Rural youth simply happen to be born in the wrong place, not as wrong people. As long as young women can see a future and hope in these honest rural youth, why would they want to compromise themselves for a life with the wealthy, flashy city men? Chasing after no bride price. What's the difference from encouraging others to suffer for the sake of virtue? The wealthier the place, the lower the bride price. This proves that the bride price is not the biggest barrier to disorder. Ultimately, it is the resource distribution in heavy industry and agriculture that has led rural youth to choose to lie flat. If you clearly see that the result of the turning wheel of fate is still the same, then choosing to stay single is also a good choice. There's no need to humble yourself and end up being someone's servant. At this moment, pay attention to the Sea of Thoughts store, where there are always unconventional perspectives to discuss.
Nowadays, in our region, there are many men who have already given up on getting married. They no longer want to marry. This generation of young men mostly comes from rural areas, where living conditions are relatively poor. They are ordinary guys, and even with expectations reduced to the bare minimum, they just want to find a woman to share their life with. But even so, they cannot get married. Today, even ordinary women from rural areas have very high demands. They want a house, a car, and a dowry. And the dowry amounts are not low. For an average rural family, the entire family has to save for a lifetime to afford a son's marriage. And even then, some families, despite exhausting a lifetime of savings, still cannot marry off their son. There are also those who, even if they can afford it, simply don't want to get married anymore. They are afraid, because the divorce rate is very high these days. They fear spending their parents' lifetime savings to get married, only to end up divorcing after a short time. In such a case, the money is gone, the wife is gone, and the man ends up divorced. And if he tries for a second marriage, his chances of finding someone are even slimmer. That's why nowadays many men with average conditions choose to give up and no longer want to marry. I don't know if you know anyone like this around you.
Educated and cultured university students went to the city because they hoped for a better life and work conditions after 10 years of hard studying. The wealth creators went to the city because they have the ability to solve their children's education problems and the elderly's healthcare issues, and they can improve their living conditions. The young girls in their 20s went to the city to work without any surprise. Women in their 30s and 40s, still considered young, also left the countryside and moved to the city, because working in the city for 1 or 2 months can earn more than a whole year of hard work in the countryside. The single women from the countryside have left. And the single men didn't want to stay in the village either. Because they wanted to meet more young women and solve their own singlehood problems. So they went to the city too. You went, I went. And so, the countryside slowly emptied. On my left, there is a house. Over 300 square meters. With just an elderly person in their 70s guarding it. On my right, the whole family left. And the house has been rented out for many years. The house behind theirs. You can only see the roof. They've been living abroad for many years. They haven't come back for many years. And this old house is in ruins. Maybe this old house is just a place they occasionally remember. The educated and cultured have gone. The wealth creators from the countryside have gone. The young and strong have gone. And those who remain are the elderly, weak, sick, and disabled. If the countryside can't keep people, it's just a slogan on the wall. If we don't fundamentally solve the income, education, healthcare, and other essential problems of rural people, if a kilogram of rice can't even buy a bottle of mineral water, if a kilogram of wheat can't buy a bun, the big cities may be prosperous, but the countryside is in decline. Behind the tall buildings of cities, there is the death of countless natural villages. If one day the countryside disappears, our food supply will also disappear. How will we solve the problem of feeding 1.4 billion people? With so much farmland, who will cultivate it? The National Strategy for Rural Revitalization. Who will carry it out? Follow me. I'm Fei Ge from Yuan. I've returned to the countryside to raise chickens ecologically. And I've started my third business.
In 30 years, there will be no places to live in the countryside. So now, you definitely should not build a house on the old family land in the countryside. Whoever builds will regret it. When I say this, many people might not believe it. I'm not asking for criticism, but now I'll analyze it with you. Listen and see if what I'm saying makes sense. Currently, most of the people staying in the countryside to farm are from the 50s, 60s, and 70s generations. The young people from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, and the younger generations after them. Most of them have gone to work in the cities. And in the future, if you want them to return to the countryside to work in farming, that will be impossible. First, they don't know how to farm anymore, because they've never farmed before. Second, they've already gotten used to life in the city, and they don't want to return to the countryside to farm. Moreover, now, most of the young people, through the efforts of 2 generations, have achieved wealth and, through their own efforts, have bought homes in the cities. The wealthier ones bought homes in first and second-tier cities. The less fortunate ones bought houses in third and fourth-tier cities, sometimes in county towns. So, in the future, these young people from the countryside won't return to the countryside to try their luck. In 30 years or 20 years, these people from the 50s, 60s, and 70s generations, most of them will be gone. In fact, after 30 years, the only people who will remain in the countryside are the elderly, and there will be very few of them. So, in 30 years, in a village, you will see only 3 to 5 elderly people. At most 10 or 8. Can you imagine such a large village, with so much land being wasted? That too will no longer be possible. If you still want to live in the countryside, the government has a plan for new rural areas. You can live in these new rural areas. Furthermore, in the new rural areas, the government has planned the infrastructure well, such as water, electricity, gas, and sanitation, making life more convenient. Therefore, in 30 years, these old villages in the countryside will no longer have anyone living there. If you are still thinking of building a house on your old family land in the countryside, whoever builds will regret it. Building a house, even if it's not expensive, will cost at least 30,000 or 20,000. Even if you live in it for 30 years, that's equivalent to paying 1,000 in rent per year. So, if you have money, buy a house in the city. If you don't have money, and your house is still habitable, don't build anything anymore. Don't renovate. Everyone, do you think what I'm saying makes sense? Please leave your opinion in the comments section.
The loss of young people in rural areas of China is an increasingly serious issue, and the question that remains is, who will farm the land in the future? In recent years, the youth have been leaving the villages, abandoning land that was once fertile and full of life. Even with investments in infrastructure such as paved roads, street lighting, internet access, and even health posts, the villages are becoming emptier. A survey revealed that 70% of the rural population still working in agriculture is over 60 years old, and this situation is far from changing. In 20 years, these same elderly people will still be farming the land, and in just 10 years, there may be no one left to work the land. What is most concerning is that many of these farmers believe they will be the last generation to maintain rural agriculture, which points to a bleak future for the countryside. However, the country is actively seeking solutions. One of these is the mechanization of agriculture, which is replacing human labor with machine power. The use of technology, such as automated farms, could be the key to solving the labor shortage in rural areas. Another solution is changing agricultural management methods, promoting large-scale farming through the transfer of land to cooperatives or family farms, which already account for 1/3 of the country's arable land. Yet, the deep connection to one's hometown, which permeates the lives of many Chinese, is not just about farming. The hometown is where ancestors are buried, where each of us grows up, is shaped, and forms deep bonds with our history. Upon returning to our hometown, regardless of distance or time, we are filled with a sense of belonging and peace that cannot be replaced by anything. As the saying goes, in the city, it is just a house, but the house of the hometown is the true home. This connection is not only emotional, it is the foundation of our identity, our roots. But no matter how much effort is put into modernizing and changing the way we farm, the attachment to the land and to our history is undeniable. This profound relationship with the land and with our origins reminds us that the land is not only a source of sustenance, but a link to the past and those who came before us. The changes being made may help address the problem of the rural labor shortage. But it's also important to remember that without the hometown, without the roots, without that connection, the future of the countryside would be empty and meaningless. Therefore, the transformation of agriculture must be more than just an adaptation to new technologies. It must respect the past, the traditions, and, above all, the deep love people have for their land. The future of Chinese agriculture should not only be about machines and efficiency, but also about respect for history and the sentiment that the hometown represents for all. The challenge lies in finding a balance between innovation and preserving the roots that make the land not just a means of survival, but a true home. What is your opinion on this dilemma? Leave your comments. I'd like to know your point of view. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. See you in the next video.